die. Okay, so now Ralph Abernathy was the only person to hold Martin, just to be clear. And Ralph held him from the moment of the balcony till they put him on the stretcher. Ralph was the only one in the ambulance. Ralph was the only one in the operating room. Ralph was the only one at the autopsy. And you will cry when you hear Ralph Abernathy say, when they take that saw and cut open Martin King's brain, and he says, and I was looking there on that gurney at my buddy, and when they cut his head, I knew my buddy wasn't in that body anymore. And on that last speech, Martin King, before he makes that, I've been to the seen the glory to come in the Lord, he turns to Ralph Abernathy and he tells the audience, I want you to know something here tonight, that my best buddy in the whole wide world is Ralph Abernathy. And why did he have the need to tell everyone who he loved as his friend unless he felt someone trying to falsely plant themselves as that person? And again, since Jesse was 6 in the order, there was no way he was the heir apparent, and Martin had already carved out the structure of the organization. They all knew it was Ralph after Martin. Al Sampson could come up here and tell you how many times Martin ingrained. No, don't do it. Let's go here, because we're running out of time, and I'd rather have you see this than hear me.
While the rest of King's aides huddled through the night at the motel, Jackson rushed back to Chicago, where rage was already sweeping the city.
Stop. The cable show I do in Chicago, I'm straight up down, seeing all over Chicago. Jesse watches the show. But in the show, I mentioned Al Sharpton inspired me. Jackson calls Sharpton and accuses him of inspiring me to attack Jackson. Sharpton says, well, what did Coakley say? And Jesse gave him every detail. Sharpton said, and I wrote it down. He said, and then I went to see Reverend Claude I'm going to say Claude Wyatt. He said, I went to see Wyatt T. Walker, who was SCLC's field director at that time. And when he told Wyatt T. Walker what I said, Wyatt T. Walker said, protect Coakley. Don't let nobody mess with him. And tell Coakley that if Jackson ever attacks him or harasses him about that analysis, just ask Jesse to tell Coakley how he got out of Memphis on the night of the assassination, since the planes, the boats, the trains, the buses, and the cars were all cut off. When I mentioned that to Dick Gregory right before he came here a couple of weeks ago, Dick said, well, you know what happened, don't you? The FBI called the airport and let one plane out. One plane that had one Negro man on it, who got away from the other saying he was sick. Jesse says, well, you know, when they had the investigation, they never talked to me. Nigga, you left. You wasn't there. And that's when Don Rose says, and Jesse and I began to plan his resurrection. Then you're going to see Jesse at April 12th say, I'm ready for leadership now. And only 4 days after that, the FBI set up the plan to attack Ralph Abernathy and Andy Young and Coretta Scott King, with no plan whatsoever to attack Jackson, who's far faster, whose future was far higher than those donkeys and those mules. That thoroughbred would have been the one to stop unless he was yours. Okay, let's go.
When we were going to get in the car, it was really a silence, you know. It was who's going to speak first, you know, because I didn't have the words to say, and he didn't know what to say. And when he came home, he got in the bed with his shoes on and the shirt. And he just laid in the bed.
In public, Jackson had an altogether different demeanor. It was as if he could see his destiny opening up before him at last, and he rushed toward it. 14 hours after the shooting, he appeared on the Today Show. Later that day, while listening to the solemn tribute at the Chicago City Council's memorial service, Jackson tapped Mayor Daley on the shoulder and asked to speak. Pointing to his shirt, Jackson said, "This blood is on the chests and hands of those who would not have welcomed King here yesterday." Then he called for calm in the city and end to the rioting. Meanwhile, at Jackson's directive, a movement publicist was booking interviews on Chicago TV shows. They were falling all over themselves to get Jesse, particularly as the word got out later that morning that Jesse had returned to Chicago and was wearing clothes stained with Dr. King's blood and was appearing before the city council and so forth. Don Rowland accompanied Jackson to the tapings, the two men riding from studio to studio in the back seat of a car. He was thinking very clearly, thinking ahead, thinking of, frankly, his own career, the future of the movement, and his role within it. And we were both reinforcing each other with the view that Jesse was a very logical successor to Dr. King.
But I see you get so much alive, asking what to do. Well, sir, I am available now. I'm more convinced than ever that every time that there is a crucifixion in right and righteousness, that in every day and universal that there is a resurrection. That is the
King thieves, long resentful of Jackson, saw his behavior as brazen opportunism. They were already angry that he had spoken to the press in the hours after the assassination, and furious that he had so dramatically inflated his own part in the story of King's final moments.
So, how many of you have even heard about this? How many of you have ever heard somebody accusing or saying something about Jesse Jackson having anything to do with the death of Dr. Martin Luther King? None of you. None of you probably haven't heard about this, and for those who probably did hear about it, they just thought it was just some talk. Somebody, and their reaction probably was, "Man, get the hell out of here. He wouldn't do that." But pay attention, man. Look at his position now. Look at how he had came up after that. He tried to really take the place of Dr. King once Dr. King died. So it's just like how I was saying before, when they want to remove somebody who's not doing what they tell them to do, they get them out of there and they put somebody in place to do what they tell them to do, who the person in place is going to listen to them. The person in place is going to already be a part of them. And that's what Jesse Jackson was. He was an infiltrator. That's what he was. Now, when it comes to Malcolm X, this is another piece of video that when I saw it, it kind of blew me away. And I was like, wow, how many people have seen this? Now, let's take a look at Malcolm X and, what happened when he was killed.
In Malcolm X's final days, it was rumored that he had a change of mind about his thoughts on who was solely behind a plot to murder him. Initially, his adversaries appeared to only be Elijah Muhammad and his Nation of Islam. It was also purported that he said his demise would come exclusively from a hidden hand in Washington, D.C. Under a cloud of distress and time working against him, it was humanly impossible for Malcolm to clearly differentiate that the two aforementioned entities and possibly others would merge as one to assassinate him. Proof of which was Malcolm's request and belief that the FBI itself would come to a favorable decision on his behalf in the investigation of the bombing of his home. This naive belief was just as far off as believing the Nation of Islam lost interest in murdering him. The old adage, where there's smoke there's fire, leaves very little doubt that all parties accused indeed were at the same location striking matches. The visual evidence in this film illustrates that Malcolm's political assassination was likely to have resulted from an unspecified conspiracy. The person who fired the first two deadly shots at Malcolm from a sawed-off shotgun was described as a powerfully built, dark-complexioned black man with a beard, wearing a dark overcoat with a folded newspaper in the left pocket of his coat. After the person with the 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun fired the first two deadly shots at Malcolm, two other men stood up and fired 9mm and .45 caliber handguns into Malcolm's body. The blast from the shotgun had shredded Malcolm's aorta, heart, and punctured both lungs. Wounds from the handguns were projected into various areas of Malcolm's entire body. The man with the red arrow pointing at him is the man who fired the .45 caliber handgun at Malcolm. A blue arrow points to one of Malcolm's followers, grasping onto the shooter to prevent his escape. Unable to escape due to a gunshot to his leg, the shooter, who is a follower of Elijah Muhammad, is placed under arrest. He was identified as Talmadge Hayer. Elijah Muhammad and all Nation of Islam officials denied knowing Hayer and openly lied about his membership in their organization. The captured shooter Hayer was indeed a member of the Nation of Islam under direct command of Lieutenant Linwood X and Minister James 3X of New Jersey's Mosque No. 25. On the day of the shooting, Minister Lewis X of the Boston Mosque had suddenly visited the New Jersey Mosque. Minister Lewis X was connected to the three main mosques who planned Malcolm's demise. The captured shooter Hayer, for many years, denied being a follower of Elijah Muhammad. Then in 1977, he finally admitted that he was a Muslim all along, and he even named his accomplices in the murder. At the time of the murder, the Journal American newspaper knew that the shooters of Malcolm were all Muslims who rehearsed the killing. Like all sloppily planned murders, through their own newspaper, Muhammad Speaks, the Muslims leave a trail pointing directly at their involvement in Malcolm's murder by foolishly placing ads in their newspaper showing that they held many events at the crime scene, the Autobomb Ballroom. The events were all sponsored by Mosque No. 7. On the day of the assassination, the first noticeable odd thing was the lack of police presence outside the ballroom, yet the police materialized immediately after the shooting. Inside the ballroom, uniformed police were hidden in various rooms adjacent to the main ballroom. Among many people present was Malcolm's wife Betty Shabazz and her 4 small children. After Malcolm was introduced, the killers rose from their seats near the front of the stage and brandished weapons and began pointing and firing at Malcolm. The shooters then ran outside the ballroom to escape. Under the ballroom's marquee, a violent commotion was underway that involved the police, Malcolm's followers, and at least 2 of the assassins, one of which was Talmadge Hayer, who had been wounded in the leg, and the shotgunner with the folded newspaper in his coat pocket, all engaged in a tug-of-war to save one man's life. One of Malcolm's followers holds on to a folded wooden chair to strike Hayer if he escapes. This man is unaware that the man with the newspaper in his pocket is the actual shotgun assassin. For many years, the live footage captured outside the ballroom was never critically examined until recently. To the average viewer, it was assumed that the man with the newspaper in his pocket was one of Malcolm's men trying to attack the captured man being held between the many police officers. Just like Lee Harvey Oswald in the JFK assassination, patsies were in place to take the blame. Nation of Islam members Thomas 15X Johnson and Norman 3X Butler offered unbelievable alibis about their whereabouts the day of Malcolm's murder. Butler seemed to be the only man in the Nation of Islam who wore his stingy brim hat with it tilted back on his forehead. And though the person's back is turned from the camera in this crime scene footage, the person with the yellow arrow pointing at them resembles Norman 3X Butler. Observe the man with the white arrow pointing at him attacking one of Malcolm's followers under the blue arrow. The man under the white arrow has an opportunity to attack the man above the red arrow, but doesn't. A police officer at the green arrow attacks Malcolm's follower. One of Malcolm's followers at the yellow arrow holds a chair, ready to strike. Malcolm's follower, below the blue arrow that is subdued by police, has suddenly realized that the man with the newspaper in his pocket is not a friendly ally and is allowed to escape after retrieving something off of his cohort. He smiles and tucks something inside his coat and calmly walks away. A police officer named Arnold Arnoff at the Orange Arrow appears not to subdue the shotgunner, but only shoves him away. Malcolm's follower under the Blue Arrow suspects a conspiracy is underway. For the power structure, the choice was simple. Let an emerging selfless leader force its hand to address the legitimate concerns of millions of African Americans, or let a harmless organization who imagined itself to be an actual nation continue to be non-threatening and self-destructive.
What condition was he in on arrival?
He was dead on arrival, and they took him into the third floor emergency room, and several doctors tried to revive him for about 15 minutes, and there was no response. I mean, he was pronounced dead at 3:30.
Has the body been identified?
When it was brought in, we didn't get a positive identification. We admitted the patient as John Doe.
Never being held accountable for his crime against Malcolm and the global black community. Decades later, the man who took Malcolm's life opened up a gymnasium and became a wealthy businessman. Who said you can't get away with murder?
Okay, so we all agree that both of these brothers were powerful black men. Both of these brothers was loved by the black community, and they both had detractors, and they both had people that was for them, you know, and against them. But pay attention, look at what happened. Now, you had Dr. King, who basically helped the white people infiltrate us. And you had Malcolm X, who basically wanted separation. So who helped white people? It was Dr. King. So Dr. King gets a national holiday. Dr. King gets a big giant statue, a monument down in Washington because Dr. King helped them. Now, Malcolm X doesn't have those things, and it's because he did not help them. It's just that simple. Now, I know that's probably going to piss a lot of people off what I'm saying, but like I said, to Dr. King's credit, I think he figured it out, and that's why he was killed. So I'm not going to sit here and say he was Uncle Tom and he was a traitor and this and that. I think he kind of realized what was going on, and maybe he told Jesse. Maybe he said something to somebody and they said it to Jesse, but I think he knew he was going to get killed, and I think he was preparing himself for that. But he couldn't just come out and say, hey, because, you know, he aided in the infiltration. He aided in letting the white people into the black community and doing what they have been doing. And like I was saying, if you watch the first video, what the Bole is an organization that basically controls the black neighborhood. They guard the secrets of the white people who's running everything. And Dr. King was definitely a member of it. And when you start doing some research into the Bole and its members, you'll see that Al Sharpton is a member, Jesse Jackson is a member. Most of these black leaders, all of these black leaders, if you've seen them on TV, if they are a black leader that's on TV, that's getting some kind of news coverage, they are a part of the Bole. I guarantee you that. But you really have to pay attention to what happened once they infiltrated, once the whole integration thing started and the black people started really going into the white stores. And it's like, yeah, sure, they were going into white stores and buying things that they needed, whatever like that. But that money was going back into the white community. That money was going back into helping white people, and it was taken away from black people. It wasn't on white people going to black stores. So their money wasn't helping the black community, but you had all these black people going to these white stores because they had more variety, more products or whatever, and that money was going back into their communities, helping their people. So today we have all these Fortune 500 companies that have flourished and that have become major successes off of black dollars, and it's still happening today because now we don't have any stores. Our stores are basically done. We have very little businesses, you know, here in America. So we're not becoming Fortune 500 companies. We're not on the cover of Forbes magazine unless you are, you know, a Jay-Z or you know, somebody like DMX who just got a, you know, $3 billion deal. But they are part of the problem, not the solution, because they're not helping the black community. They're not trying to tell you what I'm telling you, because they are part of that system. So you got to really look at what happened back then. And yeah, we go to school and we learn about the civil rights movement, and they tell us everything about, you know, Dr. King was this, and, you know, this happened to black people, and, you know, the sicking the dogs and the hoses and all this and that. But they don't tell you about how it hurt us economically. And the economic part of it is the worst part of it, because that scarred us for, you know, till now. We're still feeling the effects of it. So yeah, Dr. King basically got his wish, and they started letting black people into these white stores and white companies, and the schools integrated and all that. And, you know, you got sellouts like Al Sharpton talk about, so we need to advance the dream and this and that, all over MSNBC, advance King's dream and this and that. But a dream means you are asleep. It means you are not awake. You're not paying attention to what's going on. Now, what they didn't tell you, what they're not talking about, is the major riots that happened when King was killed. They actually invoked martial law when Dr. King got assassinated, because they were so scared of the black people and what was going on. Another thing they don't tell you about is people were so pissed about integration. Black people were pissed, and they freaking started to protest and march against integration. They're not talking about that either. They're not showing you the thousands of black people that was against integration, that marched against integration, who did not want integration. Now, they were so scared about the advancement of black people back then that they actually put together a secret law, a secret bill. It's called the King Alfred Plan. Now, I know some of you might have heard of it and probably didn't believe it was true, but this is a real, actual thing. This is a real bill they put together, and they included Puerto Ricans in the 1980s. I think it was like 1985 or 1982 or something like that. They included Puerto Ricans, but originally it was for black people. It was it's basically a plan to keep black people from ever coming together, and if we ever united, this is what was going to happen. Now take a look at this.
Let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back approximately 40 years ago. Between the years of 1960 and 1964, an organization called the National Security Council. Have y'all ever heard of that before? I know you have, because we talk about national security memorandums. Well, the National Security Council developed a government program called the King Alfred Plan. This program actually details the arrest, detention, encampment, and extermination of the black and Hispanic or Latino population of this country. No other race of people have had a program written for them but the black, and of course in 1984 it was amended to include the Hispanic population. President Reagan, along with the ex-director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Louis Goffredo, proposed this amendment in 1984, on April 6th of 1984, and hence you have the additional code name Rex 84. It's important that you understand, brothers and sisters, why this program has been put in place. You need to understand the drastic measures that have been strategically designed for our destruction. Yes, yes. Everybody say, policy planning study. Policy planning study. Now you may want to write this down so you can go verify it. For short, it's PPS-23. Again, notice the name of this. Policy planning. Policy Policy Planning Study number 23. This took place, brothers and sisters, in February of 1948. I wasn't even born then. February of 1948, a man by the name of George Kennan, Kennon, of the State Department planning staff reported, and I quote him, he said, "The United States must devise a pattern of relationships which will permit them to maintain 50% of the world's wealth while only having 6% of the world's population." You've heard me talk about national security memorandums. Well, there's another memorandum that I hadn't told y'all about. It's called National Security Memorandum 200. Now, we talked about 46, which says blacks must never be allowed to unite in this country. Well, National Security Memorandum 200, write it down, go look it up. National Security Memorandum 200 was written in 1975. Brothers and sisters, I'm not talking about stuff that just happened within the last few years. I'm talking about a program that has been in place for some time here. In 1975, a man by the name of Henry Kissinger. Have y'all ever heard of him before? Yeah, he's been kind of recently in the news. In fact, he's one of Bush's boys. Henry Kissinger stated, and I quote him in National Security Memorandum, he says, quote, "A reduction of the rate of population is a matter of vital United States security, since the United States will require large and increasing amounts of materials from abroad, especially from LDCs." LDC is acronym for less developed countries. And of course, LDCs, you know what they call that? India, Africa. That's where they say the less developed countries are. So they're saying that they will take the materials from the LDCs. It goes on to say, and I quote him, "That fact gives the United States enhanced interest in the political, economic, and social stability of these supplying countries. Wherever," check out what he says, "wherever a lessening of population can increase the prospects of such stability, population policy becomes relevant to sources supplied and to the economic interests of the United States." You want to know who the terrorist is in this world? The United States government. They have been for some time, brothers and sisters. Ex-President James Earl Carter, y'all call him Jimmy Carter, fanned the flames of this program when he issued a directive to Congress on May 23rd, 1977. President Carter ordered that a 3-year study on how to reduce the world's population be implemented. This program or study was called Global 2000, the report to the president. I quote from the Global 2000 report. Here's what it says, quote, "that there will be zero population growth for the whites on Earth by the year 2000. Did y'all hear what I said? Their study said if we don't do something, there will be zero population growth for white folk by the year 2000. It goes on to say, and in order to preserve the survival of the white race, lands which contain resources that the United States needs must be freed of its population. Brothers and sisters, it's out there in documents, but we are so churchified, we don't know what's going on. In other words, y'all, they were trying to get you to understand. According to their projections, by the year 2000, which was 2 years ago, there was approximately 6.35 billion people on this planet. How many did I just say? 6.35 billion people on this planet. Approximately 5.2 billion were people of color. Y'all hearing this? In less developed countries. The Global 2000 program goes on to state, water will be polluted in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and North Africa to destroy the coastal fisheries. The quote, desertification unit. In fact, they had what was called the United Nations Desertification Conference in 1977. The desertification unit will destroy woodlands in the Sahel region in Africa below the Sahara Desert to increase, check this out now, to increase the destruction of topsoil.
Yes, yes.
Are y'all hearing this? See, y'all, the land is so rich in Africa.
Yes.
You don't have to plant seeds. All you got to do is drop them. And they'll fertilize and take root and grow. So their program is to implement techniques that would destroy the topsoil and promote desert conditions. The people will, goes on to say, the people will have to resort to cow dung and field residue for fuel. Goes on to say another part of the report, fertility rates will be severely reduced. Doesn't say how though. It just says fertility rates will be severely reduced. Price of food will increase 95%. And Central Africa's food consumption will drop to 20% below the Food and Agriculture Organization's standard for survival.